Well, welcome back. And if you're listening, thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And if you're following along, I'm reading On the Path, an anthology on the Noble Eightfold Path, drawn from the Pāli Canon by Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu, who is an American monk who's very well known for his English translations of the Pāli Canon. And this book has been so inspirational to me, has this weekly reading. Let's see, 4 into 27. Math has never been my best subject. About 7 months, right? I think that's right. That's how long I've been reading this book. On chapter 3. Yeah, that's right. We're on chapter 3. So, anywho, I love the book so much so that I actually wrote a letter to Bhikkhu to ask his permission to make this podcast public. And yeah, I thought I would share my thought process with you on that, because some might think, well, why would you do that, sir? I mean, Bhikkhu clearly states that this is in the Creative Commons. You can use this, that, as long as you're not making any money off of it, that legally I can share this. I think for me, it comes back to this idea of sourcing the body for information, which I'll be getting into today, actually, pretty soon. When I thought about making this podcast public, when I first started doing the project, and there were a lot of seeds that were planted that facilitated, my decision to commit to a weekly book club. And, the time that goes into editing these podcasts every week and sound designing them, kind of mixing them and using my sound design background to kind of not make them perfect, but just to, to kind of be attentive to them, really in a way just to show my appreciation for the teachings, and also for Bhikkhu's willingness to share this book and not make anybody pay for it, because there's a lot of love and time that goes into creating anything, and he chose to give it away. And so my gut kind of informed me, hey, before you make this public, how about you write him and tell him about it and give him a link to it so that he can hear it. Because if you've listened to the rest of my episodes, then you'll know that my approach to Buddhism is very sincere. I am a Westerner, and I would imagine that traditional Buddhism, there would be and rightly so, there would be a lot of legitimate complaints about the podcast, that I cuss sometimes, so that might be so at any rate, I'm sharing this with you just because I feel like it's a good setup for today. I recorded unlike I usually do, where it's much more kind of extemporaneous and free-flowing, and it's more live. It's linear. I normally record my introduction live, and the whole deal. But today I had some guests, and I was kind of trying to figure out how to be a good host while also trying to kick off the podcast. And so I always know I'm going to need to edit the crap out of these. It always takes me a good day to edit these, and now I've been adding music from incredible artists from Epidemic Sound, and you can find the artist in each episode in the description in each YouTube video, so that you can, as well as a link to the artist's track. Plus, then you can find more of their tracks if you're someone who uses Epidemic music for your music beds. No, they did not pay me. So yeah, these are always hard things, I think, to explain for myself anyway, when pressed. But it really, for me, comes back to sourcing the body. And that's something that, we're going to be getting into today. And so if you are following along in the book, as well as listening to the podcast, and I sincerely hope, that if you are able to, and absolutely no shame if you are not, but if you are able to, that you are. And if not, hopefully you're maybe taking notes of places, that you maybe want to listen to again, if you find any of this valuable at all. So yeah, I left off on the top of page 137, and it's, it begins with, in terms of the specific factors. And it begins a new paragraph, and it's italicized, pointing our attention to it. And we're going to be beginning today, as I mentioned last week, with looking at fabrication. And so I'll pick it up right here. And again, thank you for listening. In terms of the specific factors of dependent co-arising, two are especially relevant as tools on the path: fabrication and name. Because these factors occur prior to sensory contact, they provide a useful analysis of what needs to be done to prevent the mind's proactive processes from leading to suffering. Now, some of this may just not sound familiar at all. And again, if you go back and you listen to earlier episodes, you'll have a little bit of context for what's being said here. And I don't want to kind of go back right now just to kind of move forward, but hopefully as I move forward, this will, hopefully be somewhat clear. And again, feel free to chat. So fabrication, really key idea in Buddhism. We have already noted in chapter 1 one of the prime ways in which the Buddha analyzed fabrication. In terms of the 5 aggregates, and again, this is something that's come up before, and type 5 aggregates into this Meditation Mind Discord server, you're going to find a lot of really good information about what the 5 aggregates are in Buddhism. In dependent co-arising, he provides another useful framework that overlaps in some ways with the 5 aggregates, but also provides a few new perspectives on the processes of fabrication. Instead of 5 categories, here he analyzes fabrication into 3: bodily, verbal, and mental. Ooh, this is juicy. Okay. I do a lot of commentary, so just brace yourself for that. I'm sure I'll be getting into that soon. The suttas discussing dependent co-arising don't clarify these terms any further, but other suttas discuss them in ways showing that their meaning depends on context. When discussing becoming on the large scale, the way karma leads to rebirth, the suttas use the 3 types of fabrication as an alternative way of describing the 3 types of karma in general: bodily, verbal, and mental. And this comes from SN 12:25. And I'm always really quick to say when I'm in over my head. And this is already, some of this is going to be in over my head because I'm not a scholar. So, I can speak to some of these in relationship to the 5 aggregates and what I know about them. Bodily, I still feel very much like I'm very ignorant, and I'm looking forward to getting into what the Pāli Canon had to say about bodily. Last week, we really kind of looked at mental. And anyway, I'm going to keep on reading, but yes. When discussing meditation, however, they define bodily fabrication to mean the in and out breath. Oh, look at that. It answered it immediately. Oh, wow, that's it. Okay, so I think I was making that more complicated in my mind than I needed to. Let me read that again. However, they define bodily fabrication to mean the in and out breath. It's really interesting. Earlier today, I was listening to a gentleman that I respect a lot. His name is Joseph Goldstein. And he is another, I'm an American, so, we find touchstones with, culturally what is relevant for us. And so he's another American Buddhist. But he was kind of talking about this idea a little bit here in a really great video. And it's actually one of the best kind of verbal explanations of meditation I've heard. And I'm glad that I just remembered it, because I wanted to drop it in the server and I forgot. But he was talking about what the Buddha taught in terms of training and meditation. And I'm going to get this wrong, but he was talking about how the Buddha taught that there were 4 stages of meditation. And I remember him explaining that the stages were really, it's so interesting. You know, my mind is quick to overcomplicate things. Mind, right? Mind, the intellectual mind. But it really boiled down to this right here. So the bodily fabrication is just the breath. And that's pretty trippy when you think about it. And I think that we can really think about this from a very subjective kind of point of view. In other words, so I've been meditating for about 25 years, and I sit most days. And now, if you listen to previous episodes, in fact, just last episode, I was talking about how my meditation changes from day to day because I change from day to day. My mind changes from day to day. And, you know, Buddhists, that's kind of what we also believe, you know, is that everything is impermanent, right? Including your mental kind of, we might have habits of mind, right? But the emotional, this kind of emotional, sensory, physiosensory, all of that, it's very much in a state of flux. It's a constant state of flux. So when you really think about it, think about the idea of the bodily component of fabrication. It is fabricated. In other words, we can work with the breath. And in working with the breath, you get different results. So I'm just going to check the chat just to make sure that there's nothing going on. Okay, so in other words, I talk a lot about my childhood in a way that, you know, is compassionate and doesn't say names or, you know, anything. It's kind of, you know, vague, but also kind of reveals, you know, that I came to Buddhism from a very high trauma state. And so in a way, you know, I have to be careful not to cling to Buddhism because of what it's done for me. So what does that mean for me? You know, that means that, you know, my parasympathetic nervous system, you know, that kind of fight or flight freeze response that Homo sapiens, that, you know, neuroscientists and psychologists are coming to understand, and that wisdom traditions already know, right, about the body. You know, that when I'm triggered, when I feel triggered, in Buddhism it's called shempa, you know, something happens and you have a reaction, and it's very much a learned response, and it's not like we're doing this consciously, right? This is all very happening below the surface. So for me, a big part of meditation is this idea that's being got at right here. You know, he's saying, so what is the bodily fabrication? Right, one of the 3, it's just the breath. Yeah, and I think that sometimes we misunderstand, that's not the right word. We underestimate, yes, we underestimate the power of the breath as something that can be fabricated. You know, I think that we forget that, and I think it's because it's so subtle. It's so subtle. And if you're not trained, right, like it's not like, at least not for me, you know, I live in the United States. I went to school, I went to grade school and the middle school and the high school, and that's how we do it in the US and most states. You know, it's kind of, that's the K through 12 process. And nowhere in that process did anybody teach me any of this. You know, nowhere, and I would imagine, I won't say your name, but that may be true for, you know, you as well, you know, and for a lot of humans, maybe depending on your cultural background, you know, but I think a lot of people in the West, we're not really taught that we can use our breath to kind of regulate our parasympathetic nervous system, to regulate ourselves, you know, to either upregulate if we're feeling really down or depressed or apathetic or unaffected, or we can downregulate if we're feeling overstimulated, we're feeling high trauma, triggered, fearful, anxious. So, by the way, this is pretty much how my podcasts go, FYI. So there you go. Okay, so I'll take one sentence and then talk about it forever. So that is how I am taking this idea, though, right here of, you know, we're in fabrication, we're talking about bodily fabricated states, and here what's being discussed is what, you know, so what's bodily fabrication? It's the breath. It's the in and out breath. And so if you're new to meditation, and again, I don't know what your background is, but one thing you'll hear on here a lot, you'll see a lot of people writing questions and in the discussion and in the Q&A forum. And a lot of the questions are about just, how do I do this? Or I used to do it and it really helped me and I fell out of practice, or I've been trying to do this and I feel like I'm losing my mind, and am I losing my mind, and should I be worried? So there's a lot of questions on here about all of this. And I think what I would say is never underestimate the power of the fabricated breath. For instance, deep breaths, long, deep breaths can actually exacerbate anxiety. Whereas, so kind of learning a little bit about breath, learning a little bit about, for instance, box breathing, or even in Kundalini yoga, which I know very little about, but they play with different kinds of varied breathing techniques, because they understood that fabricated breathing, that agency that we have over our breathing really can help us to regulate and to kind of shift our perspective. Again, I'm not sure if this is what's meant, but I'm throwing it out there, and I'm thinking it maybe. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Okay, so I also do a lot of editing, so forgive me while I try to find my place. Verbal fabrication, to mean directed thought and evaluation, the way the mind talks to itself, and mental fabrication, to mean feeling and perception. Ooh, and this comes from Sutta 131. Given the place of these three fabrications in dependent co-arising, right after ignorance and before sensory contact, these more specific meditative meanings are probably the relevant ones here. Okay, I'm just going to sit here with this for a second. And again, I'm sorry if this is confusing. This stuff is dense, and also for you it might be out of context, because we're continuing on in the book. And last week, we were talking more. Me, myself, and I, right? Me and the robot Craig, who records these. We're talking more about Yeah, we were talking more about the first and the second and the third noble truth. The fourth noble truth is the Eightfold Path. But so some of this stuff right here is kind of just adding on from last week and kind of getting into the third noble truth, and you can go back and listen or read. But getting right here into verbal fabrication, this is definitely an extension from last week, to mean directed thought and evaluation. Okay, so this idea of fabricated breath. And I love that, right? He says, hey, this is actually comes before sensory contact. So we're contemplating this before we're actually engaging with the sensory experience. This is pretty interesting to me. And I definitely think that I understand why, at least based on my own meditation practice. And that's because, and I think a good way to think about this, like the senses, because he says here, where is it? How is this couched? It's couched after ignorance and before sensory contact. So sensory contact. I think we smell something, we taste something, we touch something. We have haptics, sight, sound, and all of that will kick up, right? Will kick up a swirl of memory, and some of it's conscious, some of it's subconscious, some of it's unconscious. There's a whole kind of gestalt that kind of happens there, right? That whole kind of larger meaning of what fabrication means in Buddhism. But here, verbal fabrication, so the mind, this is what the mind does, right? Monkey mind. So here it's saying, hey, last week, it was saying of the Four Noble Truths, all of them are fabricated except for the third. In other words, everything is kind of man-made. Everything is kind of a construct. It's a construct that we have kind of come up with, a story, a construct, a way of trying to understand the subjective reality of the third noble truth. And again, this is where you might want to go back and look. And the third noble truth is what happens, at least in my experience, when you meditate a really long time and you start to actually have real contact with all the things you've heard about from people who meditate a lot. And you're like, what? That's fake. Nah, it's not. So, excuse me. So I think that's what's going on here. it's that he's saying it's maybe the way they're couching this before sensory contact, because if we really understand this, then we really understand that every time we have sensory contact, we really get kind of in a heart-mind way what's really happening here. The interconnectivity of it. Karma, real karma, not just yes, there's karma like, Buddhists believe that we keep recycling through. But if you're a secularist, then fine, strip all that away. They wouldn't appreciate that. But you can, for yourself, for now, just put all that away and just look at karma in the here and now, right? That we can understand that if we meditate on how pissed off we are at that guy from our office, that meditating that we just did on that thought stream is a choice. We don't think it's a choice until we meditate and realize that we can separate ourselves from the thought stream and get some distance between it. And in the practice of that, we also see that in meditating on that negative thought stream, we bring that with us to the office. And it doesn't smell very good. And we get what we give, and what the thinker thinks, the prover proves. This is where the law of attraction very kind of lamely took. From Hinduism and Buddhism, but there's a certain level of that, right? That's kind of another way of looking at karma from a kind of here and now approach in Buddhism, right? So let me just check the chat and just make sure everything's cool here. Great. So, and again, yeah, please feel free to, if you have any questions or comments, or even if you want to argue. I love to argue. I don't get offended. So, verbal fabrication, right? So we can meditate on anything. It's so funny when people say, because I also, facilitate a lot of meditations. And when I was in the classroom, I would, back when COVID happened and I was still in the classroom and my students were very stressed and I was stressed. We were all stressed, and I was like, hey, you guys, let's be stressed together. How would you like, to do a little meditation? And for some, they were really eager and wanted to. And for others, they were like, meditation, that's stupid. Or I don't want to know anything about meditation. And what I wanted to say to them, I wouldn't have, because I don't know that they would have really quite got what I was getting at, but we're always meditating. The question is, what do you want to be meditating on? And that's what's being got at here. Verbal fabrication is, what are the stories that you're telling yourself? And so, if you go back and you look at earlier sections of the book, or just any other, in Western psychology, we call it intersectionality. In Buddhism, it's called fabrication. In other words, in Buddhism, we don't even exist. We're kind of just an amalgam, of our conditioning, how we grew up, where we grew up. It's a construct. We're kind of, and I said this last week, in a way, Buddhists after fashion believe that, and I'll say for myself that I have come to see through meditation that we're kind of living in a simulation, and it's not a shared simulation. And it's not a shared simulation because of intersectionality, because of fabricated conditioning. I was really open about, I grew up for the first few years of my life on a hippie commune. It was not, that doesn't sound happy. It wasn't. It was very, 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 very not good. And, so because of what happened to me in that place, that conditions my behavior today. And as I talk about in previous episodes, for a lot of my life, until I kind of got the help that I needed to get with it, that I brought that conditioning into all my relationships with all humans, both male and female. It meant that I didn't trust any man. All men were not to be trusted. All males were the enemy. I went through life believing that all males were the enemy for about 30 years of my life because of what happened to me. That's fabrication. We're always meditating. I meditated on this idea. Men are the enemy. I meditated on that without realizing it for 30 years. And then I wondered why I couldn't get what I wanted, which was a healthy relationship. Anyway, I don't want to limit that, but this, I'm trying to kind of touch trying to make something a little bit more accessible that feels, oftentimes I think in Buddhism, it feels so kind of esoteric. But that is what is meant here by verbal fabrication. We actually have agency over the crap we tell ourselves, and it can be crap, or it can be conducive to our growth. And, I'm a media psychologist, and this is why I get really, really almost aggressively passionate about trying to get people off their phone and off their doom scrolling and off porn, because I'm a media psychologist and I know what it's doing to our brain. And I'm also a Buddhist, and so I really know what it's doing to our brain in terms of what we're feeding. And that's another really important concept in Buddhism. What are you feeding the brain? And that's exactly what's being got at here. Verbal fabrication. Buddhists understood, the Buddha understood that we are wholly susceptible to conditioning, whether we're grown up or children. We're seeing it happen right now. We're seeing it happen all over the world. We're seeing it happen in my country. This is human psychology, and wisdom traditions kind of got it thousands of years ago. That is what it means to be beholden to the feeding mind, whether we like it or not. Somebody on this Discord server was saying, I don't understand why people keep saying it's important to be disciplined. And I get that. I get, especially when we don't want to be disciplined, and this is also very Buddhist too. We can convince ourselves of anything we need to convince ourselves of so that we don't have to experience cognitive dissonance. And that's the reality of human psychology. And so if we don't want to discipline ourselves, or we're not disciplining ourselves and beating ourselves up for it, there's a couple ways that we can deal with that. We can bring our own frustration with ourselves into the practice and shower ourselves, radiate self-compassion on ourselves in meditation. Or we can we can erect stories to double down on stories that we need to hold so that we don't have to grow and progress. So there's really no point for me to ever argue with someone who says, why should I be disciplined? What the thinker thinks, the prover proves. Why I'm disciplined is because I understand how the mind works. And I know that I'm not awake, and I'm an egocentric moron most of the time. And so what meditation does for me, why I'm disciplined, is because when I sit with my mind and I just observe it, and that's what in Buddhism, again, we'll get to right mindfulness and what meditation looks like in Buddhism, but there's a very particular, specific way that Buddhists meditate. And when I engage in that form of meditation, I see for myself how crazy my mind is. I see for myself why the discipline is important, because I suffer from amnesia, and I think most humans do. We read a book and there's some part of us that it resonates, and we know that what we're reading is true, but then suddenly we find ourselves behaving the same way, right? And it's our psychology, and we can be compassionate, we can be self-compassionate. But I would also argue for discipline. I'm a big believer in discipline, because to my view, unless, if you were awake, you wouldn't be here. If you're done, if your job is done, if you have no more work to do, well, then why are you still kicking around on this ball? So I always challenge people that think, I don't need to, I'm above that. No, you're not. Meditate. All right, so I'm going to keep reading. So yeah, I just talked about verbal meditation, right? Okay, and then the last one, mental fabrication, to mean feeling and perception. And now we're really getting into psychology. I think this is why a lot of psychologists in the West call Buddha the super scientist, the super psychologist. It's this one right here, mental fabrication. And the trouble is that this is why, in the West, people kind of misunderstand Buddhism. The Buddha said life is suffering. Nah, that's not actually what Buddha said. It's more nuanced than that. And I think it kind of gets into what this is right here, this mental fabrication, right? Like, in other words, mental fabrication, feeling and perception. So let me just kind of, I talked about this last week. And this is where, to my mind, I just like to forward every episode with, look, there's going to be plenty of people who disagree with me, and I bow deeply to anybody who's on the path to ethical living, period. But this is Buddhism here, what I'm about to say. So mental fabrication. Okay, so in my country, right, there's somebody in the White House right now, and it wasn't who I wanted. Okay, a lot of people around me right now are very there's a lot of emotions going on. You know, I can follow the news, I can watch their body language, I can listen to their speech, and I can see for myself that they're scared, they're angry, there's just a lot of feelings. There's a lot of feelings. There's a lot of feelings. And I think a lot of what I'm sensing is just fear, terror. Fear to me feels too small. Terror is what I feel like I'm perceiving in them. So I'm not feeling that. And I have to write that off to the Buddhist practice. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong to not feel it. I'm just saying I'm not feeling it. Boy, and this is where for me personally, it's very hard to put this sort of stuff into words. So Buddha did not say life is suffering. Trump is in the White House right now, but that is not why, when I feel fearful about what's happening politically in my country, that's not why I'm suffering. And this is where it gets really kind of, I'm suffering, according to Buddhism, I'm suffering because I'm attached to things needing to be a certain way, and because I've forgotten that things are impermanent. Now, here's where it gets really complicated. There's also objective reality. You know, I can look around and I can see things, and I can see choices that I don't understand and that feel dangerous to me, and that are bringing up my mental fabricated state. I am feeling and perceiving, and that's all based on my beliefs and what I value, and you know, all the fabricated stuff, all that intersectionality. And so it's not him sitting in that big white house that's causing my suffering. It's my reaction to it. That feels trite. It won't feel trite when you really start to meditate. Then it feels deathly, deathly serious. Like, I'm not even afraid to die. In fact, I know that I'm closer to dead than I am alive, and I meditate on my death every day. And there's something that happens when you really see this. It's like, wow, nothing scares you anymore on a certain level, because you really do see the incredible radical depth of impermanence, of how it really is fabricated all the way, turtles all the way down. And the other thing, and this comes back to earlier sections, and I guarantee you when we get to right effort, whoa, are we going to be talking about it again? My job as a lay Buddhist, you know, who's married and been with my partner for, you know, 18, almost 19 years now. My job is to not contribute to the karma. So I wanted someone else in the big house in the US. I didn't get it. Stuff's going on in the US that scares I won't cuss because you're here, but scares the S out of me. What can I do? This is going to sound radical. I can continue to hold metta for Trump. I've been doing that for 2 years. I do that, and I do that because I hold metta for anytime I experience a Shempa point, I hold metta. Again, Shempa is trigger, when I feel triggered. Because in Buddhism, we don't blame other people for being triggered. We recognize that we've been triggered, and then we get curious about why we're triggered. So it's a very different approach to looking at how the way that the Buddhists explore Shempa or trigger might be very different from perhaps the way, you know, other people look at being triggered. We look at it as an opportunity to, you know, go deeper. This way of analyzing fabrication is helpful in understanding how the path is fabricated, both for the purpose of actually knowing how to fabricate it, and eventually for the purpose of letting it go when it has performed its function. Oh, I like that. Yeah, and that's pretty much what I just did, you know, in dissecting it. And boy, you know, as I just said, I find it incredibly helpful, you know, because when I look at it that way, I feel empowered. If I look at outside conditionings, outside conditions being responsible, for my mental fabrication, that's a pretty dangerous game to play, right? Wow, when you think about that for a minute, we have zero control over other people's behavior. Unless you want to try to force them, you could try to do it by force. There's certainly been people who try to do it by force. But unless you plan on trying to, in an authoritarian kind of, dictatorial kind of, hey there, welcome. Yeah, that's not how it works. That's not how human psychology works. And so I'm just going to keep on reading. So name. This factor replicates two of the mental aggregates, feeling and perception. And we just talked about that. And replaces the third mental aggregate, fabrication, with three other categories: attention, intention, and contact. Contact here apparently refers to intra-mental contact, say between a perception and a feeling, or between an intention and an act of attention. Intention stands for kamma, and that comes from Sutta 57. Hello there, friend. You're both friends. Oh, and he just disappeared. Let me go back. So an act of attention. Intention stands for kamma. Attention refers to the way the mind chooses which questions to ask and which framework to apply to what is perceived at the six senses. Oh, wow. This comes from Sutta 229. Okay, so contact. And here he's saying contact apparently means between perception and a feeling. Okay. And I realize, and there's so much subtlety in all of this. And, I know at least, you may or may not have long, short meditation practices. Again, the more you meditate, at least in my experience from many people that I've talked to, the more that some of the subtlety of this will feel very subjectively like possibly makes sense. Perception and feeling. I was just talking about this. Okay. But I think I'll use a different example because I used one that wasn't very neutral, and I'm worried that I scared someone off the call. So I'm going to make this one way more neutral. Okay. So mayonnaise. Mayonnaise. Okay, so I hate mayonnaise. When I'm around mayonnaise, I have a physical response to it. Like I have a gag reflex. Okay. Now, when I was a little kid and I was living on a small farm, and I remember getting sprayed by a skunk. Now, my stepmom, who grew up in the backwoods of Kentucky, she had learned from her mom that I'm not laughing I'm just kind of laughing in general, because as I reflect on this story, it's like, oh yeah, that happened, what a trip. So my stepmom put me in a tub with a bunch of mayonnaise to get the smell off my body. And I don't remember if it worked. I was pretty young, and I don't feel traumatized. I'm not none of that. But I do have this recollection of this relationship with mayonnaise as a child. And that colors my perception of mayonnaise today, right? So lots of people love mayonnaise. For some people, it's like one of their favorite condiments in the whole land. They slather it on their sandwiches. They slather it in their tuna. They put it everywhere. For me, I actually get a gag reflex. That's from my perception. Or I should say that gag reflex, that response, that feeling, that embodied feeling that I'm having is coming from, and this is again what fabrication means in Buddhism, right? Is coming from possibly conditioned, right? Fabricated, conditioned from possibly that recollection. Again, I'm not sure if I have this exactly right because I'm not a scholar, as I say in every single episode, but I think that is what is getting got at right here at this one fine little point. I'm just going to check the chat really fast. Okay, so the next little section says, let me go on. Okay, so yeah, that's, this whole idea of perception and feeling. I think that's why it's a really good idea. You'll hear in this Discord server a lot. Sometimes it's an argument, sometimes it's a yes and. It's one of the many things I love about about meditation mind, but we're all kind of grappling with the same questions here. And we're all kind of very awkwardly, and I feel like with a lot of compassion, this kind of digital family is trying to kind of figure it out, understanding that it's not the same package for everyone. In Buddhism, there's kind of a general understanding that we're all living in a simulation, and it's not a shared simulation. In other words, when you think about fabrication, in that sense, we're all like fingerprints. We're all very unique, and so this idea of, perception and feeling, who knows, maybe my relationship with mayonnaise today would be very romantic if I if I didn't have to take a bath in it when I was a kid. And again, notice that there's no judgment coming from me here. As I said in the podcast last week, and I only said it because Bhikkhu said it, that the way that the Buddha looked at all of this was as if he were a doctor observing phenomena. And when you think about it that way, it makes a lot more room and space for self-compassion. It's like there's no judgment here. There's no guilt. There's no shame. There's none of that going on. It's more like I can feel in my body that I have a response, feeling. Somebody earlier today in the Q&A said, when I'm on the bus and I hear all the sounds and I'm very sensorily sensitive, and I can hear this woman and she's making this mouth sound, and I can hear her making this mouth sound. You can go back and you can read this in the Q&A because we were chatting a little bit in there. And I wrote them back and I said, this is going to sound like a weird suggestion. I'm just going to throw it out there because maybe it will click. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it'll click something for you. There's this director that I really love, Junet, I can't remember his first name. He's made a lot of really wonderful French subtitles, in French, but you could read the subtitles. Amelie, City of Lost Children, Delicatessen, there's another one. At any rate, there's something that stylistically as a director he does, where he does a lot of like fisheye lenses. Like fisheye is like that, where it distorts it. You know what I mean? It looks bent and curved. And he'll do that a lot. And I always assumed, because of the context when he would drop in those kinds of shots, is that he was trying to make the audience kind of feel how intense this was. And so I said, it sounds to me like you're having one of these scenes, one of these moments where like, it's so hard to put this, so I'm not laughing at this, but it's more like this, all of this is just so kind of funny when you really think about it. So anybody else on that bus probably doesn't hear this person with the, right? But, sorry, I keep laughing. Perception feeling, right? To this person, for whatever reason, who knows what fabricated conditionings, and who cares? In Buddhism, who cares? That's irrelevant. For whatever reason, this person's mind zeroed in on that. And they said in the Q&A, it's making me crazy. I can't. And I said, and so I wrote to them and I said, well, what's going on in your body when that's happening? And you can go back and read this for yourself. And I think they said something like, well, my chest is really tight. And I'm not looking at their response right now, but I think they said something like their chest is really tight. And what they were actually describing was absolutely a kind of somatic, kind of parasympathetic response. It's a trauma response to this. Okay, now I didn't, that's kind of neither here nor there. What I think what Buddhism is more interested in is not the here nor there, the this, that, and the other thing, the why, right? Not that's just kind of not so much what Buddhism does. I know that other things do that, but Buddhism is more interested in like the scientist, right? Like, whoo, fascinating. And I think it's what I said to this person. I said, wow, that's really fascinating. What would happen if you did this? And I said, what would happen if you just kept your eyes open? We call it owl eyes. So just sit on the train. Owl eyes, that doesn't mean make your eyes look like you're a serial killer. It just means don't close your eyes. Just kind of keep your eyes open, kind of let them get a little bit soft. I'm even doing it right now so that I can feel into it while I'm talking. And tune into the sound. Deliberately draw your attention. Here we are, attention and intention. Move your attention to the sound of the smacking of the lips with the intention of finding out what's there. Wow, that's really annoying. Wow, what's going on in my body right now? And I think the reason why people have a hard time with this, right, with this idea of what's being got at here but also how this applies to the actual practical application of meditation. Why we sit on the cushion every day so that we can do what this guy needs to do on his train ride, having to listen to the smacking lips every morning, is that, I would never make fun of this person for responding to the smacking lips. Why? For the same reason why I hope someone doesn't make fun of me for the reaction that I have to mayonnaise, because I did have a traumatic experience with it. And it wasn't my stepmom's fault. Bless her heart, right? It's not like people do this stuff on purpose, but the bottom line is, when you throw a kid into a tub and throw a bunch of mayonnaise on them and they're little, you get trouble. It doesn't matter, right? What matters is that we recognize that this creates conditioning and fabrication. What we can do as doctors is we can kind of get in there. And what I have found through 25 years of meditation practice, both on the cushion and off, is that when we get curious, like the Buddha doctor that Bhikkhu described in last week in the previous sections, if we are willing to just kind of touch our toe into that little by little, right? Like, okay, I'm done, that's it. I can't, if I have to, I'm just gonna stab myself in the eye. But if we could just little by little, just touch it. You feel a reaction in the body and, okay. Could you just be willing to just stay for a sec? Just stay. What would happen if you just stayed, right? And so I'm really going off the rails. I have 3 more minutes. I'm going to use it. I'm going to take it. There's nobody talking in the chat. I'm going to take it. So at any rate, that is kind of what is being got at here. And it's really, this is kind of the teachings, the Dhamma, but this is also how we practice, right? These ideas of attention, intention, perception, and how it connects to feeling, right? And the kind of intersectionality or fabrication of all of that coalescing now, and then now, and then now, and then now. And of course, the now is just adding another element because the now is always changing.
As for feeling and perception, in Chapter 1, we have already noted the role of feeling in the pursuit of the middle way. In the section below, Final Right View, we will discuss the role of perception in performing the tasks appropriate to both the transcendent and the final levels of right view. We should also note, though, that perception also plays an important role in fostering jhana, a point that will be discussed in Chapter 9. Yeah, wow. Boy, is that true at least to my experience, to my view, to my experience. And I won't get, because we're going to get into it in Chapter 9, I won't get into it too much right now. I'll just say that if that little last sentence there in this paragraph feels like a tease that you just can't resist, then I don't remember which channel it's in the server, but someone was, I wish I'm just gonna find this and then I'll note it in my sub channel so that you can go find it for yourselves, the original poster. But they're reading a book that I can't think of right now, and they had the best expression for, I guess it comes from the book, this book that they're reading, and they were kind of reflecting on these 2 words, and I can't remember if they were asking for feedback or if they were just kind of saying, hey, I read this and I think it's cool. And I can't remember exactly what the 2 words were, but it really got to this idea right here, that in meditation, I think a lot of people, when you really think about it, especially the way especially the way that it's kind of conveyed in the media, it's kind of it's kind of absurd, really, in a way, right? Sometimes the way that these actually quite difficult and I would argue the most scary and the most, it's all subjective, right? But when you're looking at someone meditating, say you're walking down the street, right? And you just see somebody and they're in a chair and they're just sitting there and their eyes are closed, or what maybe even would look even weirder is that their eyes are open, right? And they're just sitting there and they're not really looking at anything and they're just kind of sitting there, and it probably looks pretty bizarre. But there's actually so much going on here, and I'm not going to reiterate it here because it's already been spoken about in the previous 26 episodes throughout, but this idea, this is why people quit. This is why people get sucked into clinging and craving higher jhana states and kind of getting egoically grasping and clinging and wanting more, me, my, I'm awakened. This attitude that we bring to our relationship to jhanas, the perception that we have to cultivating and I love this, I just looked back at the book, or fostering, right? Cultivating, fostering, they kind of mean the same thing, right? It's a very active kind of verb. Well, of course it's an active verb, Sarah. That's what a verb is. Love it. But in all seriousness, no, it's really saying, hey, when I see words like foster, cultivate, we can either I would argue only through modeling and through being an admirable friend, we can maybe help people make contact with that for themselves. And of course, this is how we do it for ourselves, right? That it is on us to foster jhana. But yeah, I think a lot of people who get into meditation, and again, I've been in this server now. I'm not exactly sure how long I've been in this particular server, but I feel like it's got to be coming up on a year now. And if I've been doing this book club for 7 months, then yeah, it's got to easily be a year now. And so, you see patterns. I am a researcher. I think I've always been a researcher. It's the way my brain works. And what I mean by that is I look for patterns, and I think people are really fascinating, and the way we talk, the way we communicate, our psychology is fascinating. And so, you start to see patterns in the server about, our relationship to meditation. And, one of the things that I would call a theme, that you could pull out is just this relationship to discipline. And some people have a really adversarial relationship to it. Some cling to it. I would say I err on the side of the latter, where I have to really, and you'll hear me talking about that frequently, that especially when I'm fearful, sad, scared, angry, all those feelings, right? All those feelings that kind of make me feel unsafe, maybe kind of kick in these body states that I'm all too familiar with, that my body is all too familiar with. Again, that I'll drop that title of that book again in the sub channel. The Body Keeps a Score. Definitely worth reading. For anyone, I would say, just if you're alive. Anywho, I'm gonna keep reading. The mere existence of the Four Noble Truths in the Buddhist teachings can be seen as an implicit rejection of all the other views about suffering current in his time. That it was unreal, that it was inevitable, and so had to be accepted until it ran out on its own. That it could be burned off through austerities, that it could be averted through Brahmanical rituals, or that all action led to suffering, so that only a path of total physical inaction, culminating in suicide by starvation, could bring it to an end. However, the Buddha never used the Four Noble Truths to directly refute these beliefs. Instead, when mentioning the Four Noble Truths in contrast to other views, like in being ascetic, which again, he tried that too, his main concern was to show that these truths avoided getting involved in philosophical questions that were distractions and obstacles on the path to the end of suffering, no matter how they were answered. Two prime examples stand out. In DN 9, he contrasts the Four Truths with a questionnaire that listed the hot topics of his time in terms of 10 questions. Yeah, Buddha was hip, man. Yeah, focus group that stuff. Is the cosmos eternal? Questionnaire question number 1. Not eternal? Infinite? Finite? Is the soul the same thing as the body? Something separate? after death, does it Tathagata, and I'm going to keep that in so you can hear me trying to work through it, and I will look that up. Oh, this is so cool. So I had to step away to find out what Tathagata means. And apparently, and I'm sure, hopefully, if anybody, I don't even know if anybody, but yeah, down the road, who knows? Maybe someone will listen to this, or they'll read this in the Discord server, and they can correct me if I'm wrong here. But according to Robot, it's a term used primarily to refer to the Buddha. I did not know this. This is so cool. This is another reason why I'm just really enjoying this book club. I'm just learning so much about the origin story of a religion and philosophy that matters a great deal to me. It is so Robot says it is one of the 10 epithets of a fully enlightened one, and is often used by the Buddha himself when referring to his own nature and realization. Boy, I don't know how to feel about that one. Sounds a little arrogant. But at any rate, I'm gonna move on, and I'll just say that Robot also says that it's been interpreted as one who has thus gone, one who has thus come, or beyond coming and going. Man, that's pretty cool, right? Okay, so moving on. In Sutta 229, he contrasts the Four Truths with views about the existence or non-existence of the self that arise from such questions as these. Am I? Am I not? What am I? How am I? Where has this being come from? Where is it headed? In both suttas, the crucial point is that the Four Truths provide a point of view that avoids getting involved with questions framed in terms of, quote, self and, quote, world. So again, see previous sections of the book or listen to previous episodes, the last couple. The terms underlying becoming, right? These are the becoming, right, is something that is problematic. This clinging to this notion of becoming in Buddhism. So this is why they are able to offer a way of stepping out of the processes of becoming and the suffering that results from it. So in this regard, I guess you could say that, Buddha's applying the Socratic method after a fashion. He's questioning his students. He's saying, well, who's asking that question, right? Who? Where is that? Where, trying to get people to really kind of ponder everything that they think they know about the, quote, self and the, quote, world. So we need to ask these questions, Buddha would argue, because Buddha believed that one could only come to this for themselves. Well, then how do you encourage metacognition? Well, you question. You get out of the way and not be a sage on a stage, and you get out of the way and you question. Well, who do you think you are? Okay, well, where do you think you go when you're dead? What do you think's going to happen when we die? Are you permanent? Are you impermanent? Are you sure? How do you know? So in a way, these kinds of questions are kind of poking at our ego, right? That need to have a separate self, right? In a way, it's kind of playing with us, but it's not, right? It's asking provocative questions to maybe get us to thinking about how certain are we really that there's a self? Or, in Jungian analysis, that there are selves. Yeah, there are definitely egoic selves, but, Buddhism isn't interested in any of that. That's just kind of an aside. It's just kind of it's irrelevant. All of that is just part of the thought stream, and of course, all those selves are an aspect of the fabricated state, but it's kind of putting the flashlight in a different place. So I'm gonna get on back to reading here. Dependent co-arising functions in a similar way as a means for explaining how and why the Buddha avoided certain philosophical questions. that no matter how they were answered, led to views that led away from the path. These questions included, does everything exist? Does nothing exist? Is everything a oneness? Is everything a plurality? And this comes from SN 1248:48. Are pleasure and pain and any of the other factors of dependent co-arising self-made, other-made, or both self-made and other-made? Or without self-making or other-making, do they arise without a cause? Again, this comes from SN 12:17 and 18. Is there or is there not anyone who does or experiences the factors of dependent co-arising? This comes from SN 12:35. Here again, the crucial point is that dependent co-arising provides, in the Buddhist terms, a middle way that avoids the extremes of taking any position one way or another on questions framed in terms of self and world. So again, it's irrelevant. And if you meditate, you will see why. And again, I just have to speak for myself, that I saw for myself why. And again, you could go back and kind of listen to previous episodes about how I got here and how meditation became accessible to me and when it did and what I did to kind of, all the things. So, Buddha's making some really bold claims, but remember that Buddha is also always saying, see for yourself. Meditate. And when we get to the later chapters, right concentration, right mindfulness, right effort, and we really get into the training, kind of the way that Buddhists train, the way that Buddhists meditate, I have found for myself that worlds and self really are irrelevant when it comes to alleviating my suffering, and I believe it can alleviate the suffering of others. This does not mean that we don't participate in reforms, social reforms. In fact, I would say in Buddhism, that is so core to our ethics. The ways that I've done it throughout my life as a teacher, I've taught at a community college for most of my life. And I just loved it, and I would really, bring my sentiment of right livelihood, which we'll get into later. That's one of the views to it, and it was just great. And I think because I loved it, it's not like I thought about this, okay? It's not like I thought today I'm going, it's hard to explain this. When you really, really, really face your fear and kind of really get to know yourself and recognize that there is no easier, softer way. That if you really, 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 if you're unhappy and you're profoundly unhappy, and I talk about this a lot because Buddhism, this is pure Buddhism here speaking. I'm just talking about it as someone who practices it. At a certain level, you're going to have to go inside yourself and step away from other people and other worldly things so that you can get to know yourself, so that you can identify the nuance and learn to source ethical information from and in your body. What do I mean by ethical? I'm Buddhist. You might be Christian. You might be Catholic. You might be Stoic. You might be a humanist. I hope that whatever you are, you're something in relationship to having a relationship to ethical living. You don't have to agree with me. That's fine. But this is my view. I'm Buddhist. This is our view. So anyway, as per the usual, I'm going off the rails. But yeah. So a lot going on there. Good stuff. And these questions, really kind of get this second set of questions, notice kind of qualitatively how different the wording is. Notice how they're really hung up on the self still. Right? It's almost like implicit in the wording there is a clinging. There's a need to have this frame of reference that you are the center of, right? Well, Buddhism says you're not the center of anything because there is no you. And, I've had people argue that, well, yeah, that's hippy dippy and you can't large scale that. Absolutely, you can large scale that. Do you know that Buddhism is one of the biggest religions in the world and one of the oldest religions in the world? So excuses, and don't go changing to try to please yourself. Seriously, stop changing Buddhism, Westerners, because aspects of it make you uncomfortable or prickle your fabricated, conditioned Christian values. No offense, Christians. As I always say, I tip my hat to you. I'm not Christian. Buddhism and Christianity, they couldn't be more different. I'm not making a judgment here. Okay, so again, there's no judgment here. It's a path that a human can choose. So you can choose to follow the path. You could try it out. You could be like, you know what? But stop trying to change the path to accommodate your egoic whimsy. You need to get humble, man. Okay, so I'm going to keep on reading. So into final right view. Oh. As noted above, the first, second, and fourth noble truths divide fabricated experience into three categories so as to apply three different duties to them. But as we have also noted, the duties with regard to the path fall into two stages. First, it must be developed. We just talked about this, right? It requires effort on your part through passion, right? So again, you can hear, I'm a passionate person, right? I go too far sometimes. I would argue that most of my passion is coming from this kind of passion. I have a lot of passion about this path. I have a lot of passion for what I believe it can do, for people that it's a good fit for. I see what it's done for my own life. Is it for everybody? Probably not. I don't know everybody. In fact, I'm pretty introverted, so my circle's pretty small. But it's a path that's out there that you should know about if you're exploring paths. It's a trip, man. Might be worth investigating. All right. So as to provoke dispassion for other processes of becoming. And then, when it has done its work, it must be abandoned through dispassion, along with all other fabrications. The final level of right view represents the stage when the path has done its work, and the duties of the Four Noble Truths collapse into one. Everything is to be regarded with dispassion and let go. So this is where I can really understand. Anytime I have had a conversation with someone in the West who maybe has just a little bit of information about Buddhism, and they probably got it through some kind of a Western source. Remembering that, Westerners, all humans, right? We are all painting everything with a subjective brush. And so they're gonna do what humans do, right? They're gonna take what they like and leave the rest, right? That's kind of what an editor does. So just kind of taking that to heart, right? That given that, I think that there's a misunderstanding about this idea right here. And again, it's because this idea right here is unbelievably subtle. And what I also want to say about this is that I have only experienced what is being described here twice in my entire life. And one, it did not happen through meditation. And so it sounds really dispassionate. I mean, it sounds really cold, doesn't it? Right here. Dispassionate? So you don't care? You don't care? How is that ethical? You don't care? This is impossible to describe through words. People will disagree with me. That's fine. I disagree with you. This is impossible to describe in words. When you see this for yourself, this idea of dispassion, okay? The dispassion is not uncaring. It is the most profound. It's like your heart, your whole body is bursting apart with awe, love, just it's, and again, you know, there will be people who will think that I'm making it up, right? Because, and again, read earlier sections as to why Buddhism just already knows that that's how it is, and you just, right? Again, in Buddhism, outside voices just really don't matter that much unless they're your admirable friends, you know, and the voice of a teacher that you respect and who's, you know, also committed to the path, or they wouldn't be your teacher. But this is not the dispassion that I think many Westerners might assume it to be, that you just become this uncaring, cold, shut off, shut down, connected from the head down. Are there people like that? Absolutely. I can't tell you how many people that I have met throughout my life that have meditated for years and are really disconnected from their body. You know, it's, I'm not sure how that happened, and, you know, it's whatever, it's not a judgment. I'm just saying, this is not the dispassion that you think it is. This is racking, body racking tears, profound emotional release, feeling like you're feeling every effing 47 emotions that the humans apparently have discovered all at once. It can't be described. You just have to experience it. But it is possible, you know, but not if you don't discipline yourself, you know. I mean, that's just not gonna, it's just not how life works. You know, it's like saying, hey, I am gonna be the best, you know, classical pianist that ever lived. Right on. Do you practice? No. All right. You know, so that's kind of how, you know, you gotta practice and you have to be disciplined. You know, you really have to take it seriously. Remember what this book just said here. You have to have passion so that you have the passion to focus on the thoughts that kind of help you cultivate all of this to stay on the path, lest you'll easily be taken off the path. The line between transcendent and final right view is not as clear as the line between mundane and transcendent right view, due to the fact that both transcendent and final right view employ the same mode of expression. They treat events, primarily events in the mind, simply as actions. However, there is definitely a point in the practice where the line is crossed, and that cannot be described in words. Just do it. Prior to that point, it's necessary to hold to the path so that you can use it in the interconnected duties of comprehending suffering, abandoning its cause, and realizing its cessation. However, the point comes when you turn on the path itself to comprehend it, abandon it, and realize its cessation too. In other words, you see that even though it involves less suffering than any other activity, nevertheless, it too is a form of suffering, and so has to be dropped to allow for suffering and stress to truly end. This is what SN 12:15 means when it describes this level of the practice as seeing that whatever arises and passes away, and this would include the path, is simply stress arising and passing away. Here's where I'm not going to do a lot of commentary because I'm way out of my depth, and I am feeling fundamentally argumentative about this whole section right here. It feels awfully convenient that one's own mind can decide that they now are awake enough to abandon the path. I don't buy it. So I think, and not only do I not buy it, I don't think that the Buddha ever would have said that. I think that his students would have been like, what? So what that says to me is I'm misunderstanding something here. And this is really a place where I could really get a little bit of help. And I think this is also where in the West, and I get it, I appreciate it, and I think that they're right to do it, just not at the expense of completely changing Buddhism into something else and still calling it Buddhism. Which is that in the West, there is, I would say, exclusively a focus on, it's almost like a Christian approach to it. There's this, proselytizing kind of, which I know I myself do, in a different way, right? Like I'm doing it right here, right? I'm doing it with this podcast. I'm like, yeah. There's kind of a, social justice activism has kind of gotten kind of wrapped up in Buddhism. And social justice in Buddhism has a long history, because go back and look at earlier sections of the book, and what Buddha says wrong view is, and what Buddha thought about racism. Yeah. And he, after a fashion, he was the ultimate social justice warrior. He had the message of, you elitist a-holes, trying to tell people that they don't have access to this unless they're special like you. They were born into wealth, so they must be extra special. Only they have access to it. What a convenient narrative to tell all the people. Easy way to lead, isn't it? Yeah. So anyway, I'm going to stop talking about that, but yeah, I would love to get more information about this, because maybe that's what a monk is, and maybe that just comes down to choice. I don't know. Maybe that's what's getting got at here. Maybe that's the difference between a monastic life and a lay life. That because I live a lay life, and because again, I'm still clinging to some habits that I know would help me. Anyway, blah. So yeah, I'll just kind of stop talking about this right now, but this is really fascinating, and I think I'm going to do a little bit more research and yeah, contemplate it, which is the whole point of me reading this book for myself. So SN 2257 and Sutta 116 provides an outline for how on this final level, the four duties corresponding to the Four Noble Truths collapse into the single duty of inducing dispassion for all fabrications, in line with the third Noble Truth. This outline serves as an answer to the question posed in Sutta 299 as to how one should go about cultivating vipassana, or insight. It's important to note that in the suttas, vipassana, literally clear seeing, is treated as a quality of mind, not as a meditation technique. I love this. And that this quality is to be developed by pursuing the answer to these questions. How should fabrications be regarded? How should they be investigated? How should they be seen with insight? Wow, I love that. I also have an argument. Not an argument, but I need clarification, because I understand what he's saying here, that vipassana is a quality of a way of being in the world. But to my view, you don't just magically get there. You have to cultivate it through sitting meditation. And so I guess, and this could be where the split-offs happen, right? This could be where the arguments happen is, I think the reason why vipassana is actually kind of maybe today considered an actual practice, and this will be great, because this is maybe where I'm really ignorant about, okay, so is vipassana? And I think it is, and we just haven't gotten there yet, and not a scholar. But what I'm getting from this here is that vipassana it's got to be a function of a couple of the rights working together, I guess. But, more will be revealed. And by this, it means not just the clinging aggregates in the first Noble Truth, but also the aggregates as they function in the second and fourth. And again, just go back and see earlier sections. In addition to viewing the 5 aggregates under the rubric of the 4 truths, truth, origination, cessation, and path to cessation, It recommends examining them in terms of their allure, their drawbacks, and the escape from them. Their allure, of course, is the pleasure that can be derived from them, right? So, again, you see for yourself. Yeah, very pleasurable states. Their drawbacks lie in the fact that they are inconstant and stressful. Stressful because of our relationship to the fact that they're inconstant. The escape from them is the subduing of passion and desire for them. This pattern of analysis follows that of the graduated discourse, particularly in compassion of the allure of sensuality, with the drawbacks of sensuality for the purpose of becoming disenchanted with the allure. Oh man, this is great. Yeah, maybe just go back and kind of see earlier sections there. This is kind of getting back to what was talked about earlier, this kind of the first, second, and third noble truths and kind of what's going on there. Okay, so SN 22:57 itself doesn't make the connection, but the last three steps of this analysis are clearly related to one of the Buddha's most prominent teachings, the teaching on inconstancy, stress, and not self. Although these qualities are frequently called the three characteristics, the Buddha himself never used that term to describe them. Instead, he referred to them as perceptions, the perception of inconstancy, the perception of stress, and the perception of not self. Hear the difference, right? I am stressed. I perceive stress. Huge experiential difference between those two statements. Seeing these qualities as perceptions reminds you that they are not metaphysical statements about the ultimate nature of reality. Instead, they are labels, mental fabrications, applied strategically for furthering the duties appropriate to right view. Unlike the Four Noble Truths, these perceptions are never identified in the canon as categorical teachings. They are always true, Sutta 122, but they have to be applied and at the right time and place if they are to be helpful in the practice. And that's from Sutta 139, in line with the Buddha's strictures for his own speech, that it be true, but also beneficial and timely. And I think that this is a really great place for me to stop, because this is something that I'm really, really grappling with. And it's something that I noted in the introduction of this episode, right? That why I want to send this to Bhikkhu to ask his permission, even though it's in the Creative Commons. I am going on my own sort of, I guess, intuition that a hard tone and a harsh tone that's compassionate, that I always kind of begin with, I genuinely care, because I genuinely do. But then I am applying a hard, kind of blade of destruction sort of mentality around this. So, is what I'm doing, is it beneficial and timely, and is it true? Well, it's definitely true. I definitely, and how do I know that it's true? Because I'm not just talking to you, I'm reading a book that's actually considered really well respected and extremely knowledgeable, and by an author who is extremely well respected in the United States as being very adept at working with people who speak the native language or who have a deep understanding of this particular language and can write thoughtful English translations so that I can read them. So that's how I know that it's true, right? Is that I'm being transparent with you. I'm reading the book. I'm letting you know when I don't know what's going on, like I did today, right? Where I'm like, I don't really know what he's talking about here. So, not saying he's wrong. I'm just saying, this is when I really wish that I had another voice here, because, or a teacher, because I don't know enough about the profundities here, because I'm not a scholar, of what maybe the Buddha might have intended, or so anyway. So yeah, I think I'm going to wrap it right here. And I'll just say, yeah, you know, if you're listening, thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. You know, this is probably going to be hundreds of episodes given my track record so far. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and take care of yourself. And I appreciate you. Be well.